Hey everyone, it is late at night and I'm Norman. Tonight's video is going to be a bit of an anomaly, so I'm going to be publishing this video as both the video and as a podcast. So this is going to be lengthy, it'll be a long, meandering video. So tonight I'm going to be discussing a recent trip that my wife and I took to Paris. Why we went, what watches I took, what watches I saw while I was there, why I'm making this video, all the things. Before I begin, what am I wearing on my wrist? Tonight I'm wearing the Accutron asymmetrical square gold tone legacy watch. This is a pretty cool design. However, this piece is kind of chunky, which was a surprise to me. It probably shouldn't be a surprise. Accutron seems to make some chunky pieces. I mean, the original Space View, that piece is pretty chunky also. Even without the crystal, it's a little bit thick. And even the Neo Vintage chronograph that I have is kind of thick. Considering that it's a quartz movement that's in there, I'm not sure why it's that thick. I feel like it could be thinner, but maybe not. But I'm pretty sure I'll get used to this watch. It's a great design from top down. It looks absolutely amazing. But I guess I was kind of surprised because the shield-shaped Accutron Legacy watch that I got seems to be thinner than I thought it was going to be. I mean, yeah, it seems to be just a nice, normal thickness for a watch of this size. It's 33 millimeters, vintage proportions. I think this asymmetrical square is actually 32 millimeters if I remember right. But being a square watch, it actually appears to be larger than the shield watch, which is great. When I purchased this, the one concern I had was I thought it would be really small, just because the numbers on paper, but no, it appears to be even larger than the other one. But that's what I have on my wrist. So, my trip to Paris. This year is a pretty big birthday for me, so we decided to take a big trip and go to Paris and do all of the touristy things. I mean, why not? This may be the only time that we end up in Paris. Certainly not the only time we end up in France. I would love to go back, but maybe not Paris, probably other parts of France. So why would we pretend to be locals? So we did all the things. And why France? Well, I'm kind of obsessed with the language. I remember in school when we were required to take a foreign language, everyone was practical. You know, at that time, the languages that you should be taking were Spanish and Japanese, because, you know, I guess because Japan was rocking it. So I think at that time, people were thinking that Japan was going to just take over all the markets globally or something like that. But not me. I took French. I mean, I slacked off in class, but I've always had somewhat of an interest in the French language. And hilariously, recently I was reading Casino Royale. Not recently, it was a few years ago. And the spatterings of French in that book was just so great. I decided, why not learn French? I mean, I have a smartphone, so I can install a language learning app and just kind of casually learn the language. So I grabbed Duolingo, and I'm currently at like over 950 consecutive days. So I haven't missed a single day in almost 3 years, I think that is. My maths are not so good. But it's The problem with Duolingo is it's a slow app. I mean, it's great for learning grammar and learning to read the language and whatnot, but not so good for actually learning the language. After this huge streak that I'm on, I still found that I couldn't form the most basic of sentences at all. I mean, yeah, I can say phrases, but that's about it. There's no way I could even pretend to start to carry on a conversation. So recently I spent quite a bit of money and purchased a subscription to Pimsleur, and that app is absolutely amazing. In just a few months, I've learned so much more. I'm on my way to being able to form sentences, much more comfortable speaking it. My French still absolutely sucks, but I'm more comfortable speaking it. So how that app works is it's kind of like podcasts. Each lesson is a half an hour long, and you just listen to it and repeat stuff. And spattered in there is some cultural information, which is cool. I also go on YouTube and watch all the French videos, some of the lessons, some of the tips on learning different languages, a bunch of the French culture videos. There's a couple of native French people whose videos I watch a lot, and they're super great. So I was really excited to be able to go to the country and be surrounded by the language. That was what I was really, really excited about. That and seeing all the things in Paris. The old museum stuff, the old architecture, of course, stuff like the Eiffel Tower, the food, everything. So it's about a 9-hour flight to get there, and fortunately there's no layovers or anything, so it's nice and simple, just a long flight there. On the way there, we met a really cool guy from Canada who travels all over the place, like all the time. And he was so nice. Like, we chatted with him pretty much the whole flight. My wife was trying to sleep, and we did here and there, but for the most part, we were awake chatting with this guy and going back to the back of the plane for more champagne a few times and just having a great time. At the end of the flight, we got his Instagram information, and now I get to track all of his crazy world travels and whatnot. But we arrived there, I think it was about 11 in the morning or somewhere around noon. We were going on whatever sleep we got on the plane. And that day we had the Eiffel Tower booked. So we checked into our hotel. We were at La Maison Colbert, which is right across from Notre Dame. And we went down and looked at the Seine and took the Bateau bus to the Eiffel Tower. We had tickets to go all the way up to the top, so we had to wait for the next time slot. So we ended up hanging out there for, I think, about a half an hour, 45 minutes. Then we got into line and had to wait in that line. You end up going up one angled elevator, and you have to get off of that elevator and get into another line. And at this point, it's starting to rain. That was the one sad thing about this trip, is the weather is just like the weather here. So lots of gray skies, lots of rain. I think we had one day without any rain. We had another day where it sprinkled a bit, and then we had some breaks in the clouds and no rain for the rest of the day. But other than that, gray and rain. So I would like to see like maybe the south of France. I'm pretty sure it's sunnier there, closer to Greece style weather, but yeah. So we're waiting in this line, and it's kind of raining on us a bit because not all of that line is undercover. And finally, we arrive at that second elevator. We go all the rest of the way up, and it took us about an hour and a half to get to the top of the Eiffel Tower. which is pretty wild. Fortunately, they sell champagne on the top of the Eiffel Tower because we could really use it at that point. So we bought a flute of champagne, did all of the photo ops up there, and during this trip I got a ton of clips. So following this episode, I'm going to do a vlog style video on YouTube. There's not a whole lot of talking clips that I got. Most of it is just footage like wrist shots and the sightseeing that we're doing. And part of that is why I'm doing this episode, because the watch shopping that I did, I was not able to do any videos in. I finally hit the 80s where they don't let you record. I've never had an issue in the past, but then again, I've always done my videos in 80s that sell multiple different watch brands, not just a dedicated brand's AD. And I think those are the ones that have beef. Like the ones that have multiple brands don't really care what you do. But if you go into a Longines 80, they don't want you tarnishing their brand or doing whatever people have done in the past to cause these ADs to be like, And I'll get back to that when I discuss watch shopping, because especially the Longines AD kind of comes into play. So we did the Eiffel Tower, and I'm sure I'm going to get the stuff that we did all out of order, so yeah. But it's fine, my wife won't watch this, so she won't correct me. Yeah, we ate dinner at the restaurant in the Eiffel Tower, which was kind of a last-minute decision on our part because it had started absolutely dumping at this point. I mean, if you go out undercover, out from underneath the roof, or you go outside, you're going to be soaking wet pretty much right away. And we were starving and hadn't eaten and weren't really sure what we were going to do for dinner, so we decided to eat right there. And I personally liked that restaurant. It was nice and luxury style inside. I love a fancy looking restaurant. And I thought the food was pretty decent. Apparently, the reviews of their food are kind of mixed. You know, just a tourist spot food. But our waiter was super nice. That was one thing that my wife was concerned about because she's been to Paris before, but that was way back when she was in high school. And at that point in time, everyone that she encountered was a jerk. Everyone just had an attitude and was mean to her. And so she was a bit concerned that that would happen this time around. But everyone that we encountered was super nice. We took a tour, and here I'm going to kind of jump around quite a bit, but this is relevant to this discussion. We took a tour out to Champagne, and our tour guide was absolutely phenomenal. He was a former rugby guy who ended up studying in America in New Orleans. So he was studying some of the French history there and kind of an excuse to visit the US because he hadn't been. We were discussing this thing of like the Parisian attitude toward Americans, and he was saying, this was something that hadn't ever crossed my mind, that it may be like a cultural thing, like the French invented motion pictures or whatever, but then Hollywood came along and showed how to use them, and just the frustration of like, well, we did all these things, but your culture's invading our culture, and kind of like maybe rubbing it in our face, or that kind of an attitude perhaps. That was his theory on it, but who knows. But everyone was absolutely just super cool that we encountered. There was only one person this whole trip that was basically like, please, for the love of God, speak English. And that was absolutely hilarious. But Everyone else was super polite, even when I was botching French all over the place, probably. But more on that in a bit. Okay, so let me intersperse my stories with some watch discussions so that hopefully you guys aren't falling asleep. So what watches did I bring to Paris? First off, I didn't bring any vintage watches because I knew the weather was going to be bad. So I found contemporary pieces or neo-vintage pieces, in the case of one, that have vintage aesthetics and size and whatnot. Of course, I brought the Longines Dolce Vita because this piece is absolutely amazing, and I did bring some fancy clothes. I brought a tie, a button-up, and a couple of sports jackets. Those were my only jackets there, and this looks so brilliant with a button-up shirt, long sleeve, and a sports jacket or suit jacket, suit coat. Yeah, so this piece came with me, and I thought it would be good to bring kind of an artsy piece. So I brought the neo-vintage Movado Museum in 34 millimeters. This is the piece that I had the crystal replaced with a sapphire one. And just an amazing looking watch. I love the museum. Wore this one of the days that I was there. I brought the Nevada Grenchen Antarctic with the black dial. So this was my dark dial piece. Well, my dark dial dressier looking piece. Not so artsy like the museum. And I ended up wearing this, I think, one day as well. I thought it'd be a good idea to bring a sports watch. And I'm still absolutely loving the F77 Ace collaboration piece. This is the F77 with the matte black dial and the red seconds hand. A little bit of red text on the dial. I just love the aesthetic of this watch. That sort of mix between Royal Oak, PRX, pieces like that. It has a touch of the 80s vibe to it, the 70s vibe to it. Just an absolutely brilliant watch. I wore this to Disneyland because we went to Disneyland Paris. And I'm glad that I did because it was dumping rain while we were there. I also brought my wife's ESQ watch. That's basically a miniature version of the Longines Dolce Vita. And she wore that on my birthday night when we went to Le Train Bleu and got all dressed up fancy. So we had matching watches because I was wearing the Dolce Vita. And the last watch that I brought is the Accutron Legacy, the silver stainless steel case done in sort of a shield shape. The one that I was discussing earlier about its thinness. And I wore this a few days while we were there. This watch is super cool. The dial and the indices really catch the light and just look brilliant. So yeah, I brought quite a few watches. We were there for 9 days and I wanted to have options. And yeah, I wore every single one that I brought. So the next day we did the Louvre and we had a tour for that one. We had to get up pretty early for it, if I remember correctly. It was kind of a blur. We were still jet-lagged pretty hard, so we were waking up throughout the night, having weird, bizarre nightmares. Ended up like fully awake at 3 in the morning, trying to fall back to sleep, stuff like that. So we met our tour guide outside the Louvre, and it was good. You want to have a tour there so that you can see a lot of important stuff, but you're not there for days and days. I mean, as it was a 3-hour long tour. My wife's museum endurance is endless. She could spend days in one museum. I like museums, but I have sort of a 3 or 4 hour limit where I'm just kind of museumed out. I enjoy looking at all the ancient stuff, the artsy stuff, painting, sculptures, and whatnot, but after a few hours, I'm just like, I am museumed out. So at the end of our tour, my wife wanted to go back to the Egyptian displays because I love Egyptian stuff. The aesthetic of ancient Egypt is so wild. So we saw the room full of their mummy coffins, which were crazy, especially the ones that were made out of stone. They look otherworldly, like something out of a sci-fi movie, just because of the stylized depiction of the person, but done in a smooth black stone that almost looks like a black metal or something. That was crazy. And they had a mummy there, and I didn't realize that they didn't simply horizontally wrap bands around the head, down the arms and whatnot. The face on this mummy was wrapped up in a square. So it was strips across the bottom, they go up the top, across the top the other direction, back down the other side, working inward, and it looked like something straight out of a horror movie. Depicting mummies like that in movies would be so much more terrifying looking than just your standard mummy. It was so creepy and cool. And I think, if I remember right, after the Louvre might have been the night that we ended up going to a cocktail bar. So the places that we had encountered so far were really bright, and I just wanted a dark, dim cocktail bar. The champagne was great, but I was kind of missing a cocktail. So we did a little bit of searching around in maps, and we found Solera, which was really, really cool. So in this cocktail bar, which is pretty famous, I hadn't heard of it before we found it, but you drink your cocktails out of crazy cups. They had a glass tobacco pipe, and you drink out of the mouthpiece. They had a hot air balloon, and you lift the top off of it and drink out of the hot air balloon itself. I had one that was just a glass, and the whole thing was tentacles, and it looked absolutely cool. Their cocktails were delicious. It was great. And the bartender, near the end, it had kind of cleared out, and it was just us and a few people back in the back area. We were near the front door, and the bartender was asking us how we happened to find that bar. So we told him that we were just looking for a dark, dim, moody, loungy cocktail bar. And he was like, oh, here, and gets a piece of paper, and he wrote down the speakeasy, the Moonshiner. And that was actually on my list of to-dos, which I'll have to go back to. I had a whole list of goals for this trip, and one of them was to do a speakeasy in Paris. And the Moonshiner was one of the ones that I had on my list. So with this guy's suggestion, yeah, that kind of made up my mind. We were going to go to the Moonshiner. So he wrote down the name and the address and put a note on the bottom that said, from Stan, bar manager at Solera. He said we could mention that he sent us their way. Unfortunately, when we went there, we didn't really get a chance to do that because they were super busy. But Solera was fun. It was really cold and rainy though, and it was a decent walk, so that was a little bit brutal. But we did have umbrellas from the hotel. Our hotel was phenomenal. So you get free breakfast there, free champagne with your breakfast, and I'm pretty sure by the time we left, they didn't really care for us at breakfast time. Because I would go there and there wouldn't be champagne out, so I'll bug them, or it would be empty and I'll bug them to bring out another bottle. Politely, of course, but Yeah. It was so great having some champagne at breakfast every day. So my list of to-dos were mostly food related. So I wanted to try beef tartare. I have never had that, and I did. When we did our champagne tour for our lunch break, we went to a small restaurant in the area that we were at, and I ordered beef tartare with frites. We kind of went back and forth on how that's properly pronounced. I think Fritz. But it looked like they gave me just a whole pound of raw beef. Like it was huge, huge. And it wasn't a whole pound because you mix it with some sauce and flavorings and whatnot. So it was lighter. But it was just so much. By the time I was done, I was so over beef. I feel like if it was half that size for the proportion, I would have left the table stoked on beef tartare. Because it was great. But it was just so much that by the time I was done, I was like, I do not want to ever have that again. I feel like I've had enough for a long, long time. This one wasn't on my list, but I did try swordfish and caviar, and that was absolutely delicious. It's like half fish, half steak, just amazing. I also wanted to try veal, and I got to try that. I forget the name of the restaurant. If I do recall it, I'll have to put it in the show notes so you know what I'm talking about. But there's this restaurant where you wait in line forever for this place. It's like being at Disneyland waiting in line, and the recipe hasn't changed since it opened hundreds of years ago or whatever, and it's super affordable. And so I ordered veal there. It looked like chicken. It was light and chicken color, and it tasted kind of like pot roast. It was delicious, but really unexpected. I also wanted to try escargot, which I have had before in the past, but it was so hit or miss. The first time I tried it, they weren't in shells. They were already shelled. And however they were cooked, they kind of tasted like little bits of steak-like meat. But the second time I tried it was absolutely foul. Oh, I think it was just boiled. They were still in the shell, but they had like the mouthfeel, the muscly mouthfeel, like you were just picking up snails and eating them raw out of the garden or something. The flavor was no good. It was so bad. So I haven't tried it again, but I was figuring while I'm in Paris, I'll try some. And that ended up being one of the best meals that I had. They were already shelled. They were served in a sauce, kind of like clam chowder style, and just delicious. It had the mouthfeel of clam chowder. It's different flavor, of course, but amazing. I wanted to have absinthe in France because I've had French absinthe here. Actually, not here, in New Orleans. And I have had some bottles of it in the past. But yeah, so we went to an absinthe bar, and that was fun. I tried a couple different ones. They were phenomenal. And I also wanted to get a hat. That was going to be my birthday present, and I ended up getting one. I went with a black fedora. I love gray because they're kind of more casual. I mean, they're still dressy, but it's like a little step down. They're not so formal, if that makes any sense. Kind of like a smart, super smart casual. And black just seems so formal. But when the shop owner went to the back and got out this fancy fedora, number one, it fit perfectly, which is weird because even if I measure and order the right size, I always end up having to put spacers in the hats. But this one, out of the box, fits perfectly. It has a bit more attitude to the brim, which is the only critique that I have of my Sinatra fedora is the brim is kind of flat. I like mine with a bit more attitude, a little bit more of a lift in the back and downward angle in the front. And this hat has that. It's rabbit fur, it's black. It's kind of minimalist. There's no lining on the inside. It's a little bit softer than the Sinatra hat, which makes it feel like it'll last longer. It's just nice and utilitarian. It won't get discolored by handling it like grays do when they're light enough, like the Sinatra one. It was expensive. This is the most expensive hat that I own now, but absolutely phenomenal. Love it. So all the items on my list checked off. We did Versailles. We did a bunch of other churches that my wife had looked up. We did Le Sacred Coeur. And we walked all the way up to the top of the dome, which was, I think, 3,000 steps or something insane. And that was pretty cool. Oh, I forgot that another thing on my list was to try foie gras. And I tried that. And yeah. So, hilariously, I'm not a fan of cheese. I like it cooked into stuff, but not on its own, which is really weird because we're in France, right? Yeah. My wife loves it, so she ate my portions of cheese. But it was so weird. If you had put that in front of me and I ate it and you didn't tell me what it was, I would have thought it was a weird cheese that I was eating. But I did force myself to eat nearly all of it. But, alright, a few more stories, and then we'll wrap up with watch stuff. So, like I mentioned, we did Disney Paris, and that was really fun. The weather was terrible, but one crazy thing is the roller coasters in France are absolutely next level. Next level. It was wild. So we did like the Stark coaster or the Avengers coaster, I forget what it was called. And I mean, I love the Hulk coaster in Universal Florida, the California Screamin', well, that's what it used to be called, at California Adventure. That is like the smoothest roller coaster I've ever been on. And Space Mountain. We always do that one multiple times when we do Disney. And we did it in Paris. But this Avengers coaster was like Space Mountain on steroids. So you round the corner and boom, it launches you from 0 to full speed in a second or two, however fast, into total darkness. And you immediately start going into corkscrews and loops and just madness that never ever ends until it abruptly stops. And then that's where you get off. Just craziness. I feel like here, the coasters like give you breathers. Like it's madness and then it'll take its time around a corner as you approach another drop into some more madness. But every coaster that we did in Disneyland Paris was like non-stop, sheer, utter madness. It was so amazing. I really wish I could have gone on them multiple times, but we were kind of in a time crunch. And crazy enough, I ended up seeing my sister's friend's brother in Disneyland Paris. What? We were walking, I heard someone call my name, and I was just like, surely they're not talking to me. And then I heard it again, and I turned around, and sure enough, yes, here's this person from my neck of the woods all the way over in France, and we happened to bump into each other. It was the wildest thing. But yeah, we did Versailles, we did the gardens. I really loved the gardens there. The rest was impressive, but so gaudy and crazy and just over the top. But the gardens were so much fun to walk through. And for some odd reason, on this whole trip, I was on a huge Napoleon kick. Huge. So I got so many pictures of him, of statues of him, of Goofy, souvenirs of him. I really wanted to buy one of the Napoleon hats that we saw in a souvenir shop. I think it was at Versailles, but it was like the real deal. I mean, it was $400, but it wasn't a goofy costume hat. It was full on. I have like a collection of goofy hats that I wear around the house. I mean, you've probably seen one of them because I've worn my fez in a couple videos. And of course, I bought a beret while I was there. I did not wear it in Paris though, but I did have to get one. So when I'm lounging around the house and feel like it, I can have a beret on. But okay, so we'll wrap up with the watch stuff. So I found a watch shop. I looked it up and we went there, and it was Ochrono. And they let me record video and get some photos in there. And they had such a great selection. Most places it's like the usual. You'll see Hamiltons, Tussauds, just kind of G-Shocks, maybe some Longines, but just kind of the usual. They're the brands that you see in most multi-brand 80s. But this one they had a display of Nevada Grenchen. That's crazy. And I tried on 2 watches that were both just brilliant. I think they were both under 40 millimeters. I think one of them was 36. I'll have to look up their stats, track down the exact models that I had tried on, but I tried on a Meistersinger with a beige dial, and I've always wanted to try on a one-hander. Kind of want to own a single-hander. That would be fun. But this piece looked nice and small and kind of vintagey, especially with that beige dial. Absolutely amazing. The other one was a Vulcain, and it's the Cricket watch. So it looks like it's a GMT. But there's a pusher on it. And when you do that pusher, you can move the GMT hand around, but it's not a GMT hand. When you look at the markers around the edge of the dial, they're like sets of 5 numbers or whatever it is. So I'm not sure exactly how you use it in conjunction with Cricket. I'm sure some of you out there know and can let me know, but that watch was absolutely amazing looking. I don't know if I mentioned already, but it had a beige dial also. I would love to get one of those, but both these pieces were kind of spendy. They were both like over 3,000, I think, so bummer. But we did Champs-Élysées amongst a bunch of other stuff that we did that I just don't have time to cover because this is already getting pretty long, and I'm sure half of you are snoring away or have clicked off to something else because, I'm just rambling on here. But I wanted to see it, even though I knew the shops were just luxury brand shops, nothing that you couldn't encounter outside of Paris. But since they're all right there, I thought it'd be cool to see. And I ended up going through some 80s there. The first one was Longines, and I asked them if I could record in there, just get some photos or short video clips or whatever. She went back to the back to talk to the manager, and no, you cannot. So, which is really unfortunate because on display there, they had the automatic Dolce Vita that I used to own. And at that time I was wearing my new Dolce Vita, and I really wanted to get a side-by-side photo because the one that I owned previously looks so huge compared to my new one. No wonder I never wore it when I owned it. I mean, it looks way too big for a tank style dress watch. I mean, I'm glad it's out there. So those of you who have larger wrists or prefer larger watches, you have an option in the Dolce Vita line, but for me, it's just way too big. There were some other cool pieces in there, but I didn't try anything on, just kind of looked at them. We quickly went through a Rolex 80, just the usual stuff there, and of course, all just on display. And actually, we didn't go through a Rolex 80 there, we went through one in the airport, which is interesting. I kind of wanted to ask them how they are able to operate there. I know that in Vegas, in Caesars, it's like first come, first serve. They'll get a small shipment, and if someone's lucky enough to be there when it first gets put out, they can get it. So you don't really have to be on a list, but yet you do, because those are going to be gone immediately. You'd have to stock the store or something and know exactly when to be there. But I went into a Bulgari 80 and totally forgot about the Octo Finissimo until we saw the display of them. And I asked the lady there if they had any of the Ultra Slim, because that would be cool to see. And she said, nope, they don't have any. Another guy came over and was like, here, let's try some of these on, which I always feel bad about, because I'm like, I am not buying these. I don't have 10 grand, 20 grand to spend on a watch in the middle of a vacation that I'm already going broke doing. But I tried them on. I tried on the black ceramic, the matte gray titanium, I think it is, and the stainless steel. And the stainless steel looked pretty good. And this guy, I kind of mentioned the Ultra Slim, and this guy was like, shh, don't tell anybody, but we actually do have one. It's just that it's reserved and we can't bring it out. So that was a bummer, but I got to see an Octo Finissimo on my wrist, 3 of them actually, and I mean, it's a crazy design. It's not my style, but it's kind of fun with all the facets and stuff, and that matte gray finish looks pretty wild on that piece, and the black one is a good variant just because it's all black. I mean, I can admire them. They're pretty cool. Again, just not really my personal style. But I didn't really go into any of the other 80s that we encountered there. At that point, we had been wandering around for a while, and I wouldn't be able to get video clips in the shops anyway. So yeah, we just kind of let that go. I mean, I have just a bit ago gone to Seattle and tried on a whole ton of watches, so yeah. But yeah, I'll have to leave a link to Ochrono in the show notes because they were really cool. They let me try on a few pieces. I got to chit chat with one of the workers in there, show off the Accutron Legacy I had on, and just kind of talk watch nerd stuff. And since they let me record in there, I would love to give them a shout out. They have an online store, so you can purchase watches online, or if you end up in Paris, you could visit the brick and mortar there. It was a great place, and they had a very unique selection of watches that I haven't seen in multi-brand 80s before. Even in Vegas, when they had the huge Tourneaus there, they didn't have stuff like Nevada Grinchins there. They had Tudor, and I think they had IWC, Bell & Ross, so definitely some brands that you don't see in a lot of 80s, and at that time it was huge. They've since had a small shop in there, and last I heard they were about to open a gigantic one, but never seen Nevada Grinchin in a brick and mortar until Ochrono, so yeah. But that was the trip to Paris. There's so many other details and stories that I could tell. Oh, I'll leave you with this. One thing that I learned is if you know how to say it's crazy in French, Uber drivers seem to love that. So everyone in Paris kind of drives like in Greece. It's a little bit crazy and terrifying. So when you take an Uber, you are, even if you're not a praying person, you're in the backseat praying because it's crazy. And twice while we were there, when things got so crazy around us that even our driver was getting irritated about it, I would just be like, c'est fou. And he would start busting up laughing and just be like, oui, fou. So, little pro tip there. But yeah, that was our trip to Paris for my birthday. Some stories and some watch stuff. Thanks for watching.